Okay. And for the record, what is your degree?
I have a degree in health education. It's
BAS,
It's
right?
a BS.
BS in health education?
Yes.
Okay. From where?
San Francisco State University, graduating class of 2016. Or I guess, was it 2017, Nathan? I guess it was 2017. 2017.
Okay, San Francisco State, 2017. Other than your current workplace, what is your work history?
Well, my work history, first
And
job...
just work, not volunteer places, just work.
Where I've earned money, I guess the only two places I've gotten money from when I worked is, I had an internship, but where I've got money from was I was a camp counselor for about 3 years. I worked with all different ages, all different age groups. It was a summer position, but I went from being kind of a, working with the little kids, being a team leader, it's kind of being an all-day babysitter, to going to be an actual teacher in the classroom.
Okay.
And then being kind of in charge of the office.
What do you mean in charge of the office?
So my job was I was the nurse for camp. I was the camp nurse, and I was responsible for part of the upkeep of the office.
Okay.
And then the other job I had was right after college. I worked at Good Vibrations, wanting to be a sexual health educator. I ended up being a retail representative, and it was not for me. I did not like that job.
So you wanted to be a sexual health representative?
Yeah, a sexual health educator. There were two different positions within the company, but they had me on as a retail associate instead. So instead of teaching people about sex ed, I just sold sex toys.
Okay.
I didn't really like that. I thought that I'd move up in the company or get that position eventually, but that's not how it worked. So.
Okay. Okay. And currently, what company do you work for?
I work for Life Steps, LIFE, and then and it's the same word, capital S, capital T, capital E, capital P, capital S.
Okay. And when did you start working there?
I started working there 6 months ago on October 10th, 2018.
Okay. How did you hear about them?
I went on a Glassdoor, and I was looking for community organizing positions at that point. And they had a director of social services position and a program coordinator position. I decided to apply for the program coordinator because it was basically an after-school teacher position, and I had already had experience working with kids, so I thought that would be a good fit. And then I tried out for the director of social services because he said a background in some sort of, health or social work related field. I thought it was a long shot, but they thought I was a good fit.
For the director?
Mm-hmm. Director of social services position. It's not the same thing as a social worker. Because the social work, you usually have to go to school for social work and get a degree and a license. This position doesn't require a license. But they do prefer people with a social work background, or in my case, health ed. They thought it was close enough.
Okay.
Do you want a Kool-Aid Slammer?
No, thanks.
Okay.
What is your current title?
Director of Social Services and Program Coordinator. I have two positions.
Okay. And why did you start working for them in particular?
So I started working for them because I had had a previous history of nonprofits. I liked it. I had been an intern at one when I was in college. I wanted to do something where I'd be out in communities and learning how to do some kind of community organizing and helping people. Eventually, I'd like to go into policy, so I thought that this would be a good stepping stone to do that. And as far as I can tell, it is. It allows me to kind of get to understand more populations I normally wouldn't have regular access to. Working with low-income elderly and folks in low-income families. That's something that, I didn't grow up getting to do, and this allows me to kind of understand their background and where they're coming from and how best to work with those communities and what kind of resources they have, as well as what they're lacking. So it was very, very appealing to me because I got to help people for a living, and I got to learn about different communities for a living, as well as learning how to organize properly, which is what any policymaker needs to know how to do.
Okay. For this in particular, since it's nonprofit, why choose nonprofit rather than private business?
The problem with private business for me is that you don't get to help a lot of people, and you run a lot of risk of malpractice, of business malpractice. The last place I worked for, last two places, they weren't nonprofit, they were for-profit. Problem with those is that I don't feel good at the end of the day with the work I do, especially in a sales business where you're selling people things that maybe they don't need or aren't good for them. With nonprofit, I feel like not only you can be assured that what you're doing isn't going to negatively impact people, you're actually pushing against the negative impacts that other people have made. And also, I went into nonprofits because I am really into social justice. It's kind of my whole life. I'm a queer kid. I have a lot of friends of color of different religions growing up, and so it's been very important to me that they're represented and they're taken care of. And the fact that I have had enough schooling and enough privilege to have enough resources to help them, I feel it's my obligation that I need to help others since the position of privilege that I have. I also think that nonprofits, not only do they do a lot of good work, they make up for a lot of things that we're kind of lacking that maybe the government doesn't give and they should. And the government subsidizes different nonprofits as well. So this is, in a sense, government work. It's a contracted position, but it's government work nonetheless. And so, which is something I've always wanted to do. I've always wanted to do something where I can make some kind of difference for my country. When I was I had to change my major from cinema actually because I did not feel good about what I was doing. So that's why I went into health ed, and it's the same reason I'm going into nonprofit. Because I don't feel good at the end of the day if I'm not helping.
Okay. So you answered it already, but for just volunteer work before this, if you could go over your experience with it again?
Yeah, so the most recent volunteer position...
Strictly just volunteering, not paid positions.
Yeah. Most recent was I was a health education consultant. intern with Green Action, which is an environmental justice group. That's where I decided to intern with for college.
How would you spell that? Green Action?
GREEN space action.
Okay. And you said it was a environmental health?
Justice group. Health and justice, you can say both.
Okay.
They're based in San Francisco. The guy who created it and runs it, he was a part of the EPA for years. He was upset with how the EPA was not doing their job in protecting low-income people of color, specifically Native Americans. He saw that the EPA wasn't tackling environmental racism, and so he started his own nonprofit to, again, kind of make up for what the government wasn't doing and kind of fill that space.
And what was the word you used? Impact, environmental racism, yes?
Environmental racism, yes. I can explain that if you need me to.
No, I've heard it in my class. I'm pretty sure I still have that old notebook. It correct me if I'm wrong, but it is the people of color are often in areas that aren't environmentally healthy, be they noise pollution, sound pollution, air pollution, whatever, and because of economic factors or whatever have you, they tend to be collected in that group, and which is wrong.
Yes, exactly. Usually it's actually rich people who force them into those areas.
Okay.
And before that, I was a sexual...
Sorry, let me finish this up.
Go on.
Okay.
Before that, I was a volunteer with San Francisco State's Queer Alliance.
Okay.
I would help run events and give out information to LGBTQIA plus people. You can just say queer people. It's kind of the umbrella term most people are fine with. And then also people who are getting their masters or minors in human sexuality. They come and see us too.
Human sexuality, that was?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And then before that, I was a sexual health educator on campus.
Still on San Fran State?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sex health advisor?
Yeah, or sexual health educator.
Okay.
I would go into classes and teach people about STIs, human sexuality, and then how to put on a condom. It was the more basic stuff that if they didn't take a human sexuality class, they probably wouldn't get.
Okay.
And before that, it was just high school and stuff, and that's not really important. It was, what did I do? I volunteered at the library when I was in high school, and then I volunteered with the the San Jose Park Association. And those are only for a few months.
Okay. Now, other than the high school one, of course, it was Pioneer, so you have the senior project, and you are obligated to do that. For the other pieces of volunteer work, why did you choose to spend your time to volunteer?
Well, two of them were for classes, and that was the Queer Alliance and the one at the Green Action. But I got to choose where I wanted to work for those.
Okay.
And then the health education, that was completely my choice. So the reason I chose Green Action was because they were working in policy, and that's something I want to work in eventually. I also thought that it was really interesting that they were using policy to fight health issues rather than other health educators who would use more outreach. And I'll let you finish.
Okay.
I find working in policy more intriguing than simple outreach because you can reach a much broader range of people and tackle larger issues that just community organizing on its own may not be able to fulfill. You can get rid of unjust laws, and so people won't be punished for trying to stay healthy, which is a huge impact on keeping people healthy. It's like you can't fight things that cause bad health if you can't fight it, if it's illegal to fight it.
That is a very good quote I'm going to use.
Thank you.
So for the Green Action and the Queer Alliance, what was it like volunteering? Like just a day-to-day basis?
Do you need me to explain why I chose the Queer Alliance, or are you...
Yeah, I think so. Why don't you explain why you chose them?
That one's easy. I'm gay, and I wanted to help my community.
Okay.
Wanted to get to know more people like me and help them out. Mm-hmm. They had helped me when I first got there, so I wanted to return the favor.
Okay. And what would your day-to-day going on for that be?
Queer Alliance, the day-to-day was I would come. I would only come when there was an event usually, and I would help prepare for an event. I would come in every few weeks, ask what the tasks were, and then start setting them up and talk to the person, the head of it via email, and then I would run the event. The event would usually be, I'd sit at a table, it'd be hot. I give out information, I drink water, talk to people.
Just general spreading awareness.
Spreading awareness and using a lot of my customer service work. People don't talk about that in community organizing. You gotta be a people person, and being able to have a good customer service voice and face is really important. Because people are not gonna want to talk to you if you're ornery and pissed off.
Okay.
As for Green Action, I would come in twice a week, I believe. It was all the way to San Francisco. I was living in San Jose, so I'd get up, I'd take BART for 2 hours, get there, get to the office. I'd have a little table they let me work at. I'd ask the head of head of Green Action, what he wanted me to do for the day. He gave me a list of things that need to get done. They ranged from redoing a poster for community outreach to calling. Let's see. There's a word for it. It's like community influencers. It's people in
canvassing?
Not exactly canvassing. It's there's people in the community who are usually kind of like the mouthpieces, people who are in charge of stuff, pastors and policymakers and teachers, people who have influence in the community. Call them, ask if they have their support for us for either a rally or a protest, or ask if we had done an intervention in their community, ask how it was going. And then the most responsibility I had for something is I was in charge of creating health surveys for different communities to kind of gauge what kind of environmental issues are they facing and what is it causing. So if we knew that there was nuclear waste in an area, we would usually ask them if they had any blood issues, reproductive issues. If we knew that they were near a hazardous waste dump, we would ask about asthma and liver issues, things like that. So the health problem that we knew about, we would ask questions about that. Then we'd ask general issues. So we can kind of get a sense, like, is there some kind of environmental thing we missed?
Okay.
And then I'd also do research on different companies who are trying to build on hazardous locations, and also information on, like, the information the EPA had gathered in terms of, like, the environmental safety of different locations, and seeing if, like, the place, like, maybe people who were trying to help out, like, had a history, like, 50 years ago, maybe being a naval shipyard.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And even though you're still currently working, do you still do any volunteer work?
Do I do any volunteer work? Ooh, you know, I don't. I don't really feel, since I work for a nonprofit, and I'm in the position now where I work with volunteers, I feel that, while some people feel like they may need to, I feel like I do enough during my day that if I gave any more in my spare time through volunteer work, I would be too emotionally drained to do my job.
Okay.
There's something called emotional fatigue or empathy fatigue, and it happens among health workers a lot, and nonprofit workers, where you give your empathy all day and all your emotions all day. It happens a lot with nurses, and by the time you get home, you can become jaded and mean, and you don't feel like you don't want to help people. So it's really important, if you work in any kind of nonprofit or health sector or policy sector, you gotta take some time just for yourself.
And that was empathy fatigue, you said?
People call it emotional fatigue and empathy fatigue. More people hear emotional fatigue.
Okay. Currently at your work right now,
Mm-hmm.
How do you compare that to the volunteer work that you've done?
I'd say I make a bigger impact with my nonprofit work. I'm working with more people. I have more responsibilities. I'm in charge of data collection and putting things into our database, and that data is used to help fund other programs like ours. The volunteer work, it's a little harder to, kind of see how much of an impact you're making, because you're not looking at the numbers. You don't get to see those people like every single day. Some volunteer work you do, but the ones I had, I dealt with different people every day. These, I'm a kind of a stable person in the communities I'm with, which is appealing in its own right for me. And I get to see what I do. I get to see how that's affecting people. The one thing is that with volunteer work, you can assume that there's a happy story after you leave people. When you work for a nonprofit, if you help someone, it doesn't work, you see that it's not working, and sometimes that can be frustrating. But I'd rather see, what if I'm doing isn't working, so I can change and do better for the next person. So it's better. It's more of a more continuous timeline where you can see your effects. You can see the effect of what you're doing. Also, you get to build more bonds with people, which I think is nice. And I mean, hey, you get paid and you get benefits. Mm-hmm. I do like that. It's hard to want to come in and volunteer every day if you don't have, food in your stomach and medicine in your cabinet.
Yeah. With where you are right now with your nonprofit work, would you say that you're content?
At the moment, I'd say I'm content, yet hopeful for future change, I think. I like my company, and I like what I'm doing, but I think my talents would be wasted if I did it forever, because I'm getting better at what I'm doing every day, and I feel I would like to continue that growth, and that growth is only really possible through different positions. So if the company wants to have me in a more regional position or other more managerial positions, that would be fine. If I don't get any growth, then I'm going to try and go into more policy. And with my background, hopefully it'll help with that. So for some people, I know that they're very content with what they have right now. My nonprofit position doesn't pay a lot. I get paid a little over $30,000 a year, which is kind of low income, actually. So I'm kind of where my families and seniors are. I make a little more than them, quite a bit more, but I'm still not able to support myself here. And so if I would be getting paid more, yes, I think I'd be more content. But since I'm not going to with this job, I think growth is one way I can keep helping people while also making sure that, I can retire and not have to be in a low-income facility. Because as much of good work as I do, it still kind of sucks. I mean, it's not, there's days where it just really sucks. And I've seen it enough to know that if I can help it, I'd rather not do that. And if I can make changes to make sure no one else has to go through that either, that's what I want to do.
What would you say is the most rewarding part of your current work?
The most rewarding part of my work is when you help someone and then they learn how to help themselves. It doesn't happen very often. A lot of people in communities, when you help them, they have a victim mentality, and that's not their fault. A lot of people who come to help them enforce that, and they've been through a lot. So that's not, a hit on them, saying that they have a victim mentality, but regardless of what causes it, it does. And so you help somebody and then they feel like, okay, well, only this person can help me do this thing and I can't do it on my own. So when you can help someone and you give them resources on how to help themselves and you see them do it, that's awesome. And it gives you hope that hopefully that they'll get out of low-income housing, because that's the goal, is that they'll be able to support themselves and their families. And that's more with my family site. With the senior sites, it's about maintaining. They're not going to be working. We have people who are like in their 90s. So they're not going to go back to work. The most rewarding part is when you build a connection with them and they're happy to see you every day and you see them doing well. The goal is to have them live as long as possible and to be as comfortable and happy as possible. It's more about quality of life rather than a goal for you to eventually get out of here. The goal is to have you stay here for a super long time until you pass on. And hopefully you don't pass on for many, many years.
Okay. What do you least like about your current work?
The thing I least like is when you try to help people and they don't want help. That can be very discouraging. Where you're helping people and they try and tell you how to do your job. Usually, if they're offering advice, that's fine if it's helpful. It's not a good feeling when they're offering you advice that's dangerous, that is inefficient, or goes against what rules you have to follow through your company. With kids, it's dealing with, I'd have to say, dealing with the negative effects of living in a community where your parents didn't have the benefit of a good education. Some of that is racism and sexism and homophobia. There are studies showing that people who go to college tend to be more liberally minded. And you can take that to mean however you wish, but I think that the isms and the phobias, it's more rampant in places where people haven't finished their schooling. And And it comes from places where people are low income, and they believe it's the fault of another minority group. You see that sometimes. And like, if you see that in adults, you can deal with it. The hardest is seeing kids emulating their parents, and you try and teach them not to. You try and give them other options, and they just won't take it because it's not being enforced at home. That can be very discouraging. Also, when you work in a nonprofit, sometimes you come from a scarcity mindset because you're trying to work with and find enough resources. That's a big part. Working with a nonprofit is also working with other nonprofits and seeing what the government can do for you, and trying to spread out all of those resources to make sure everyone has enough and no one, is crying like, we need more, we're not getting enough. And you have to go in with kind of a scarcity mindset. It's like, we don't have all the resources we need, and so you kind of have to scrounge and do your best. And sometimes it feels like when we get free food and we have a lot of people asking for free food, it kind of feels like you're in a refugee camp sometimes, especially with the kids. The kids get very hungry, and we don't have it's hard finding places that will donate food. There's a lot of places that will do it, but there's a lot of constraints. It's like, we won't deliver to this part of the neighborhood, or you need to pick it up and we can't deliver. There's a lot of constraints that I just do not have the resources and time to do by myself. So I think actually it's just resources, strict on resources is what's frustrating. Especially nonprofit, they don't hire a lot of people and they don't give them a lot of hours. So we don't really have the manpower to do as much as maybe we should be doing.
Okay. And just any final thoughts that you would maybe like me to try and put in here?
I feel like nonprofit work is very important. I think it's also important to, if you ever want to donate or work for a nonprofit, you need to look at what they do and their history. There's some nonprofits out there who don't help all people. A really good example is the Salvation Army. They do really good work. Is it the Salvation Army, Nathan, with the homophobia? Is that it? I think it's that. Does that ring any bells for you, Salvation Army?
No.
It's the people who ring the red bells during Christmas. Yeah, okay. Let's do Autism Speaks instead. You gotta look in. Autism Speaks is a nonprofit that says they help autistic kids. They don't. What they really do is they have pity on the parents and are trying to get rid of autism instead of trying to help children who are autistic. And it makes them seem like a burden and a disease that needs to be fixed instead of a group of people that exist and we should accept. There are other nonprofits which are really homophobic. There's ones that are really racist. The one I work for is accepting of all religions and sexuality orientations, and races and just all backgrounds in general, which I'm very lucky for. But as I work with other nonprofits, they're not all like that. And, as a gay person working with nonprofits, I have to keep a large part of myself to myself. I go down to Second Harvest Food Bank, and there's Second Harvest Food Bank distribution places where a lot of religious people work. It's part of their volunteer work with their church, which is a wonderful thing to do. But because they think I'm like them, they also think I'm a very religious person, which, to them makes sense. To me, I'm not. But I can't tell them I'm not religious. I can't tell them that I'm gay because I could face persecution. So just because people want to help doesn't mean they're all good, because you need to look at who they're helping. also a lot of gaps that when you work with nonprofit work, you can see that I feel like if people knew more about how, like, you're too poor to afford this thing, but not poor enough to get services. It's being called trapped in the gap, and it's really hard for our nonprofit to work with. It incentivizes people to, not get that job, not, try and go back to school. Because they feel like if they do and they have too much money, they won't get the services, and then they'll be right back where they started. And that's really tough. And it's not like when Republicans say, oh, people are on this and they won't get off it because they're lazy. It's like, no, they are trapped there. Some of these services keep these people alive. And you're saying you are either poor, but you can stay alive, or you can try and have a better life and risk literally dying and losing everything.
Okay, that's all the questions that I had.
Great, that's it for me.